Pleasantville is a 1998 movie starring a pre-Spider-Man Tobey Maguire and a pre-Legally Blonde Reese Witherspoon, and it's really great, and I love it. It immediately hooks you in because it appeals to something I believe we all have: a comfort show. You know, the one series you've rewatched 1,000 times and that you laugh at references to with your friends and that you probably own merch for. It's chicken soup for the brain soul. Maybe it reminds you of a simpler time, or maybe it's so drenched in nostalgia that it has become synonymous with familiarity. Sometimes it's purely for the good vibes. I'll let you take a wild guess at what that property is for me. The premise of Pleasantville is based on that very idea. Our protagonist David is so deeply engrossed with this 50s sitcom that he knows even the most obscure trivia facts about it. He can recite its lines by heart, and he turns to its reruns whenever the real world gets too rough. To him, this series represents everything he wishes life could be: wholesome, safe, and happy. Unlike the real world, where he is haunted by a dull present and a hopeless future, a crashing job market, and a looming threat of global warming. Like, gee, David, you could have tried to be less relatable. When David is given a chance to live in this virtuous reality, it would seem like a dream come true. But the movie poses the question of whether this kind of perfection can even be maintained. Spoilers, it can't, but we all kinda knew that. It's the matter of why that really captivates me. In fact, the movie even goes as far as to say that this type of perfection is bad, and that it can and should be destroyed through one unstoppable tool:
revolution.
And I don't know, if David can use a TV show to learn some life lessons and abolish the system, what's stopping me from taking this movie and doing the same thing? Join me as I dive into this world of impossible perfection, because I want to talk about Pleasantville. Here's the premise. David is a teen who is somewhat disillusioned with the real world because everything sucks. All his teachers do is talk about the crashing markets and the environmental crisis. He can't succeed in romance, his family's falling apart, and it looks like destiny can only bring him doom. His sole comfort seems to be Pleasantville, this old sitcom based on a perfect family. Meanwhile, his sister Jennifer is the exact opposite. She's cool, popular, fully embracing the crazy teenage life, and she doesn't have a care in the world. She also thinks Pleasantville is totally lame, which, sorry David, but I kinda see where she's coming from.
What's a mother to do?
Thanks to some technological magic and sibling rivalry, they end up right inside the world of Pleasantville. They take the place of the protagonist kids in the show, with David becoming the wonderful Bud and Jennifer becoming the perfect Mary Sue. That's literally the character name, by the way. It's Mary Sue. That's the kind of universe we're dealing with. Since they became those characters, they need to live life as those characters would, performing the same actions that the kids would perform on the episodes. Otherwise, the world of Pleasantville will fall out of order.
I don't know what I'd do if she wouldn't go out with me.
David is great at doing this, but Jennifer has a different agenda in mind, and she starts teaching the kids all about letting loose and living wildly. Because of this, the monochrome world of the series slowly becomes more and more colorful, a fact that angers some of the other characters, specifically the old white men. The mayor tries to keep the order, but it's too late now. The Technicolor revolution has already started, and it is unstoppable. By the end of the film, the colors have left no stone unturned, and every person, prop, and place has become positively vibrant. I call it a revolution because that's the way the film treats it. The colors represent leaving the old world behind and walking towards the future, much like an old television program that suddenly becomes Technicolor. It feels inevitable, as all change seems to be, and there's no coming back from it. It is this revolution that proves that a world as perfect as Pleasantville cannot exist, and it happens within two different levels: personal and social. In other words, going to therapy
and abolishing the system.
The first aspect to this colorful revolution happens in a personal level. Our protagonist David believes that the world of Pleasantville is perfect, as it is the most picturesque version of a supposedly better time. And even within those standards, it's on a whole different level. The weather is always sunny, the home team always wins, the guy always gets the girl, and families stay together. Nothing could possibly go wrong. This is the kind of world that he dreams of, which is why he turns to the sitcom for comfort. But when he's transported into it, he doesn't feel very happy about it, both because it wasn't his choice and also because he was magically taken into a TV series. I think he has the right to freak out. He understands that in order to keep Pleasantville perfect, he needs to act according to its script. This isn't hard for him because he's seen all the episodes a billion times, but it's still not natural. This is a world that wasn't made for him, no matter how badly he wanted to fit into a world like that. Perfection can only exist when everything is written in advance, and it leaves no room for error or variation. His sister Jennifer, however, doesn't care for any of that, and she's almost determined to cause as much trouble as possible. While the sweet 50s jocks come to her with dreams of holding hands, she skips right to making out. She teaches boys to be forward and girls to be flirty, which can come off as vapid, but they see it as liberating.
These people don't want to be geeks. They want to be attractive.
Jennifer is the one who first introduces change to Pleasantville, and while that breaks some of its perfection, she also brings it color. It starts off with props and objects, but it soon spreads to people, and this personal change happens as the characters break out of their molds and realize what they truly want from life. This revelation confuses Jennifer, because even though she's lived a life that is twice as wild as any of the other Pleasantville teens, she still finds herself stuck in black and white. David argues that maybe the answer lies somewhere different, even if he hasn't found the solution himself. Jennifer's color comes to her once she allows herself to become interested in literature, and she even chooses to study instead of hanging out with her date. Even though she taught the other kids to rebel by letting loose and living freely, whenever she did those same things, it wasn't liberating, it was performative. She had been presenting herself as a flirty, careless teenager because that's what others expected of her, and that's what she came to expect of herself. In a way, she was stuck in a mold just as any other teen from Pleasantville, and she lived a life in a way that was just as automated. She breaks free by allowing herself to choose a path that was different from what others had assigned her. Meanwhile, David remains monochrome. When Jennifer brings color to Pleasantville, he's originally mortified because she's tampering with a universe that had no need for change. At first, it appears that he had been following along with the town's plots and events because he didn't want to break this world that he holds so dear, even if it is artificial. But the viewer soon realizes that David is keeping the order simply because he likes the way things are.
You really like this, don't you? No, it's not like you think it's funny or dorky or anything. You, really like it.
In that sense, keeping the order is the easy way out. He doesn't have to question what these values truly mean, or what the consequences of his actions are. He simply has to go with the motions, because that's what he believes everyone else should do, even if it makes them miserable.
You can't always like what you do. Sometimes you just gotta do it because it's your job. And even if you don't like it, you just gotta do it anyway.
Why?
So they can have their hamburgers!
David had been made to feel so powerless that the only way he sees of surviving is by pushing through and sticking to the path he had been assigned. The true miracle of Pleasantville was how no one seemed to mind that fate. They were happy to do the same stuff over and over, never questioning why. And in the end, that's what perfection came to mean to David. He wanted to believe in a world where the system didn't need to be challenged, and where everyone was fine with everything. But the only way of being that complacent was to run on autopilot, to live a scripted life. David finally finds his colors when standing up against some bullies. In other words, when he stopped simply going with the flow and started to stand up for what he believed in. His real personal revolution is learning that you have to put in the effort to make things better, instead of being merely an observer to life. He had to actually allow himself to live so that life could finally feel worth living. Existence only seems perfect when people don't question it, because once you start to do it, you realize that nothing is certain, which is terrifying but also liberating. If there is no script, or if you choose to go against whatever script there is, you can finally pursue your own sense of happiness. If you reject the molds that are assigned to you, you can never be called a failure for not fitting into the mold.
When your father was here, I used to think this was it. I had the right house, I had the right car.
There is no right house, there is no right car.
Once you understand that perfection can't be maintained, you can stop beating yourself up over the fact that your life isn't perfect. God, who needs therapy? Just go watch Pleasantville. Anyway, yeah, that's cool and all, but now it's time for the real revolution. Revolution on a social level. It's time for Pleasantville to get political. So, things start to change. This is visible, literally, both because of the way that the characters behave and because color is showing up everywhere now. They try to deny it at first and pretend that it will go away, but it only gets stronger. It starts with the teenagers, the ones who are different, and they love being different. According to a bunch of old white men, this is bad, because they don't want things to change. They want Pleasantville to remain, well, pleasant. Their definition of pleasant means keeping things the way they are. They find the kids too wild, their books too radical, their songs too loud. They don't like it how women are rejecting their housewife roles, how girls are letting themselves be flirty, how art is becoming shocking instead of just pretty. They don't like it that people are starting to realize their mundane jobs bring them no passion, and are choosing to pursue their true interests instead. Change itself is a conflict of interest, and this world has never known any conflicts at all. These men feel like they need to take a stand.
It's a question of whether we want to hold on to those values that made this place great.
Their refusal to accept what is new makes them ban all changes, under the pretense of keeping things pleasant. Schools are forbidden to adapt their curriculums to reflect current thinking. Books are banned, and so is art that isn't strictly traditional. They introduce these ideas with a smile, but there is a great sense of threat behind it. The monochrome citizens vandalize colorful artworks, harass the Technicolor people, and ban their means of self-expression. They claim to be keeping things pleasant, but they're always the ones initiating violence. The mere presence of color, and of people who exist in it, is taken as defiance, and it is met with retaliation and brutality. If this is the way in which they enforce their old values, you can start to see why those values needed to change in the first place. Pleasantville was pleasant simply because the system had never been questioned. And once people begin to question it, they see that there's no inherent reason why things must be the way they are. After all, they would just love it if you believed you simply had to flip burgers, never wondering why. Just going with the motions. Wouldn't it be better if everyone just stuck to the system? Why can't you just do what you're told? Pleasantville's perfect way of living can only exist if no one ever questions it. Because if they do, then they will see that things aren't always so black and white. As more and more parts of this world become filled with color, the efforts to keep the order become increasingly desperate, and the cracks become so deep that the entire foundation crumbles. David completes the town's conversion by making the mayor recognize that things represented by color, such as ideas of change, liberation, and self-expression, were so intrinsic to human nature that pretending they weren't real was just hiding from the truth. And when the mayor is forced to confront his own anger, he sees that Pleasantville's pleasant nature could only be kept by suppressing anything true and natural. I'll admit, it's an overly optimistic outcome. It's one of those movies that believes you can win the battle by peacefully talking to your oppressors, even if they've shown you nothing but violence and injustice, while in real life, your mileage may vary. It's also a movie that borrows heavily from segregation-era imagery without bothering to deal with the actual elements from that specific movement. Wow, what a beautiful no-colored sign you got there. Would have been nice to see a single black person in this entire movie. It's less of a collective-based narrative and more like a David-centric story. But in many ways, David being the one who completes the town's transition to color feels almost poetic. Because when the movie begins, he was a perfect candidate for not questioning anything. He wanted things to remain the same just as much as the mayor did. And he also hated the change that colors brought, because he also loved the things that Pleasantville represented. More than anything, he wanted to believe that a world like that was possible. Anger was the spark behind his own colors. He finds them by standing up to some rowdy boys harassing the character of his mother, boys that claim to be keeping things pleasant by instead being violent. Here, David stops being just an observer and decides that he needs to get involved with the cause he's been ignoring for so long. Anger is also the key to unlocking the mayor's change, because by making the mayor admit he feels it, David is essentially proving that the man who represents Pleasantville isn't pleasant himself, like the bullies he'd stood up to before, or the people who reacted so violently to the peaceful protests of the Technicolor citizens. David's personal revolution cannot exist without a social one, and vice versa. His own change of heart comes to fruition when he realizes he can't just stand by and watch the world transform around him. He has to actually be part of that transformation, or he'll just end up representing principles he no longer agrees with, even if at some point he came to believe in them. It wasn't enough to admire change, he had to actually partake in it. I'll also give the movie credit for ending on this note of marvelous uncertainty. The characters look around their newly Technicolor world, now fully changed by their own freedom and determination, and they conclude that they have no idea of what comes next. It's the end of order, the end of certainty, and the characters find it beautiful. A perfect world can only exist if everything is scripted, and a perfect system can only exist if no one ever questions it. David looked at Pleasantville and thought that it was perfect. Once he became fully immersed in it, he realized that this kind of perfection is an illusion, and that life can only feel worth living once you allow yourself to change your own ways and the ways of the very world you live in. David's deep dive into Pleasantville was rather literal, but in the end, it essentially boils down to thinking critically about the world he'd been presented. This journey helped him understand his own reality, and now he can cope with it a little better. And really, aren't we all just a bunch of Davids? Plunging into the media that brings us happiness, thinking about its problems as if we were questioning our own, coming back from our deep dives a little better at coping? No? Just me then? I think I'm okay with that. Pleasantville is a movie about learning to question the reality you have been given, crafting a new path for yourself and discovering your own true colors, and turning that power into a catalyst for change involving the very system you belong to. And I think we could all use a little bit of that energy. At best, it teaches you how to cope with change. At worst, it's comfort food. But when you let yourself stop and think, you will see that there is value even in that. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. If you have enjoyed the video, you can do those cool things such as clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell too. You can also follow me on Twitter and share this video with your friends. If you really like what I do, you should consider supporting me on Patreon. I have linked it down in the description and I highly recommend you check it out. Feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if it is about how much you love Pleasantville. I'll be surprised if any of you love it, but I'm looking forward to that revelation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!
You can't do this, Jennifer! He doesn't exist! You can't do this to someone who doesn't exist!